Section 12 of Rewards and Fairies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Rewards and Fairies by Rudyard Kipling. Section 12. The Tree of Justice. The Ballad of Minepit Shaw. About the time that taverns shut and men can buy no beer, two lads went up by the keeper's hut to steal Lord Pelham's deer. Night and the liquor were in their heads, they laughed and talked no bounds, till they waked the keepers on their beds, and the keepers loosed the hounds. They had killed a hart, they had killed a hind, ready to carry away, when they heard a whimper down the wind, and they heard a bloodhound bay. They took and ran across the fern, their crossbows in their hand, till they met a man with a green lantern, that called and bade 'em stand. "What are you doing, O flesh and blood, and what's your foolish will, that you must break into Minepit Wood, and wake the folk o' the hill?" "Oh, we've broke into Lord Pelham's park, and killed Lord Pelham's deer, and if ever you heard a little dog bark, you'll know why we come here. We ask you let us go our way, as fast as we can flee, for if ever you heard a bloodhound bay, you know how pressed we be. Oh, lay your crossbows on the bank, and drop the knife from your hand, and though the hounds are at your flank, I'll save you where you stand." They laid their crossbows on the bank, they threw their knives in the wood, and the ground before them opened and sank, and saved 'em where they stood. "Oh, what's the roaring in our ears that strikes us well nigh dumb?" "Oh, that is just how things appears according as they come." "What are the stars before our eyes that strike us well nigh blind?" "Oh, that is just how things arise according as ye find." "And why's our bed so hard to the bones exceptin' where it's cold?" "Oh, that's because it is precious stones exceptin' where it's gold." Think it over as you stand, for I tell you without fail, if you haven't got into Fairyland, you're not in Lewis jail. All night long they thought of it, and come the dawn they saw they tumbled into a great old pit at the bottom of Minepit Shaw, and the keeper's hound had followed 'em close and broke her neck in the fall, so they picked up their knives and their crossbows and buried the dog, that's all. But whether the man was a poacher too, or a Pharisee so bold, I reckon there's more things told than are true, and more things true than are told. The Tree of Justice. It was a warm, dark winter day, with a southwest wind singing through Dallington Forest, and the woods below the beacon. The children set out after dinner to find old Hobden, who had a 3-months' job in the rough at the back of Pound's Wood. He had promised to get them a dormouse in its nest. The bright leaf still clung to the beech coppice, the long chestnut leaves lay orange on the ground, and the rides were speckled with scarlet-lipped sprouting acorns. They worked their way by their own short cuts to the edge of Pound's Wood, and heard a horse's feet just as they came to the beech where Ridley the keeper hangs up the vermin. The poor little fluffy bodies dangled from the branches, some perfectly good, but most of them dried to twisted strips. "3 more owls," said Dan, counting. "2 stoats, 4 jays, and a kestrel. That's 10 since last week. Ridley's a beast." "In my time this sort of tree bore heavier fruit." Sir Richard Dallingridge reined up his grey horse Swallow in the ride behind them. This is the Norman knight they met the year before in Puck of Pook's Hill. See Young Men of the Manor, the Knights of the Joyous Venture, and Old Men at Pevensey in that book. "What play do you make?" he asked. "Nothing, sir. We're looking for old Hobden," Dan replied. "He promised to get us a sleeper." "Sleeper? A dormouse, did you say?" "Yes, a dormouse, sir." "I understand. I passed a woodman on the low grounds." "Come." He wheeled up the ride again, and pointed through an opening into the patch of beech stubs, chestnut, hazel, and birch that old Hobden would turn into firewood, hop poles, pea boughs, and house faggots before spring. The old man was as busy as a beaver. Something laughed beneath a thorn, and Puck stole out, his finger on his lip. "Look," he whispered, "along between the spindle trees. Ridley has been there this half-hour." The children followed his point, and saw Ridley the keeper in an old dry ditch, watching Hobden as a cat watches a mouse. "Huh!" cried Una. "Hobden always tends to his wires before breakfast. He puts his rabbits into the faggots he's allowed to take home. He'll tell us about 'em tomorrow." "We had the same breed in my day," Sir Richard replied, and moved off quietly, Puck at his bridle, the children on either side between the close-trimmed beech stuff. "What did you do to them?" said Dan, as they repassed Ridley's terrible tree. "That." Sir Richard jerked his head toward the dangling owls. "Not he!" said Puck. "There was never enough brute Norman in you to hang a man for taking a buck." I cannot abide to hear their widows screech. But why am I on horseback while you are afoot?" He dismounted lightly, tapped Swallow on the chest so that the wise thing backed instead of turning in the narrow ride, and put himself at the head of the little procession. He walked as though all the woods belonged to him. "I have often told my friends," he went on, "that Red William the King was not the only Norman found dead in the forest while he hunted." "Do you mean William Rufus?" said Dan. "Yes," said Puck, kicking a clump of red toadstools off a dead log. "For example, there was a knight new from Normandy," Sir Richard went on, "to whom Henry our King granted a manor in Kent near by. He chose to hang his forester's son the day before a deer hunt that he gave to pleasure the King." "Now when would that be?" said Puck, and scratched an ear thoughtfully. "The summer of the year King Henry broke his brother Robert of Normandy at Tenchebray fight. Our ships were even then at Pevensey loading for the war." "What happened to the knight?" Dan asked. "They found him pinned to an ash, 3 arrows through his leather coat. I should have worn mail that day." "And did you see him all bloody?" Dan continued. "Nay, I was with De Aquila at Pevensey, counting horseshoes and arrow sheaves, and ale barrels into the holds of the ships. The army only waited for our King to lead them against Robert in Normandy, but he sent word to De Aquila that he would hunt with him here before he set out for France." "Why did the King want to hunt so particularly?" Una demanded. "If he had gone straight to France after the Kentish knight was killed, men would have said he feared being slain like the knight. It was his duty to show himself debonair to his English people, as it was De Aquila's duty to see that he took no harm while he did it. But it was a great burden. De Aquila, Hugh, and I ceased work on the ships, and scoured all the honour of the Eagle, all De Aquila's lands, to make a fit and above all a safe sport for our King. Look!" The ride twisted, and came out on top of Pound's Hill Wood. Sir Richard pointed to the swells of beautiful dappled Dallington, that showed like a woodcock's breast up the valley. "Ye know the forest?" said he. "You ought to see the bluebells there in spring," said Una. "I have seen," said Sir Richard, gazing, and stretched out his hand. "Hugh's work and mine was first to move the deer gently from all parts into Dallington yonder, and there to hold them till the King came. Next we must choose some 300 beaters to drive the deer to the stands within bowshot of the King. Here was our trouble. In the melee of a deer drive a Saxon peasant and a Norman king may come over close to each other. The conquered do not love their conquerors all at once. So we needed sure men, for whom their village or kindred would answer in life, cattle, and land if any harm come to the King. You see?" "If one of the beaters shot the King," said Puck, "Sir Richard wanted to be able